We're going to have a look at the doctors' upcoming strike, which is going to be happening quite soon for a period of months, and this is going to have a dramatic impact on those people who are waiting for care. And as a result, as you'll see in one of these videos, I've got Robert Winston, who is a kind of a granddad of the medical profession now, and his view that people will die as a result of the British Medical Association, the BMA, who has been coaxing doctors into doing this in his opinion. But we'll cover 3 clips today, one of which is the view from a couple of resident or junior doctors.
Out now, and that was, 8 years ago? I kind of wish I'd taken that warning on board, to be honest. Like, I've cried so many times at work, which is just purely that I'm overwhelmed with the amount of work, and I feel like I can't provide my patients with the quality of care that I would want to provide for them. It doesn't feel like you're helping people. Like, sometimes it feels like, you're barely keeping patients alive.
A higher number of our colleagues have decided to leave the profession altogether. And that is a symptom of how the pressures have been increasing during the recent years and how burnout our profession is. If we cannot retain our own colleagues within the profession, that something is seriously wrong.
In terms of next year, every single person I know is taking a year out just because they can't face going into training. I'm looking to hopefully travel to New Zealand next year to practice medicine, but in a different healthcare setting. I know that the working conditions are meant to be so much better for doctors in New Zealand. And there are some days that, I'm like, this is a great job, but unfortunately they're so few and far between because it's so uncommon that we've got the right amount of staff in, that we've got the right equipment. So I hope by going to New Zealand, I'll be able to experience practicing medicine in like a good environment where I'm paid well and I'm respected, and just have good working conditions, basically.
Achieving a pay restoration will not solve all the issues, but it will certainly increase retention and then recruitment of fellow colleagues within the profession, and therefore potentially putting a halt to the exodus of doctors who are seeking better pay and better working conditions elsewhere, who are simply leaving the NHS or perhaps leaving the country altogether.
It was hard really to put up with any more of that snivelling rubbish coming from that lady. One thing to be borne in mind when you're looking at things like that is that last year resident doctors were given a 22% pay rise by the government, and that's 22. Okay, so double figures, the double figure 22, which is by anybody's standard quite a large increase in pay. And it does incrementally go up the longer these people are residents. You can actually access a spreadsheet that is put on the internet by the BMA, and it shows each year that goes by as these people become more clinically trained and clinically signed off, that their pay goes up, and they make decent money, I would say. Certainly up to anywhere in the £70,000+ a year, which by anybody's standard in the United Kingdom is double the average wage. I think the average wage is hovering somewhere around 34,000 a year. Lots of people, of course, make a lot less than that. Lots of people make a lot more than that, and certainly resident doctors can make up to double that. Of course, in the first couple of years they don't make a lot more than that. I believe they start at about 37, 38, but over time it works its way up to about 73. I could be wrong on that. That's how I read those figures, but I think those are good ballpark estimates for where the pay goes. And as a 20-odd-year-old person starting on almost 40 grand a year and very, very quickly escalating over the first 4, 5, 6, 7 years of your working life, then you're going to quickly escalate to the mid-70s. And so, this pay here, 22% increase over the previous 2 years, and they've been awarded 5.4% pay rise for this financial year, so an above inflation pay rise for them this year, which is being rejected. And so, moving on from young people who don't have quite the constitution that people of the last century had, doctors used to take it that their life was going to be quite difficult up until, the age of about 30, and they accepted that as par for the course, and they used to just get on with it and do it. But last century, we were a hardier group of people. This century, everyone's completely and utterly consumed with the selfish nature and the narcissistic way that we view our own lives. That lady in that video that we've just watched there is hugely focused on her career, and that's fine. Whereas doctors from the 20th century weren't really that bothered about their career. They knew that they were in their profession, they were going to get paid good money by the end of it, and they just kind of went to work and got on with it. There's always an element of selfishness in every job, in every life. But I feel in that video you were presented with a couple of people there who were being overly selfish in their approach.
I absolutely believe in markets, but the NHS is not a market. It's a socialised healthcare system. That is the fundamental point. If doctors want to be paid more, let's actually look at a social healthcare system. Let's look at countries like Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, that have public and private partnerships where there is competition, which means that your pay is decided by the competitive market and not by government bureaucrats, which is the current system.
Would you allow government bureaucrats to bring in a ban on doctors striking?
What I would like to see is the National Health Service as a whole and the spending that we're using at the moment being used more efficiently. Now, we all know that...
Do you want them... The question is, would you ban the strike?
I think with the National Health Service, absolutely. But this is what a ban actually looks like, Susanna, is saying to those particular people, if you don't show up to work, you can lose your job. And by the way, I think that should happen across entire industry.
I think that's a foolish thing to do, right? So a canary in a coal mine is there to alert people of danger, and that's what the strikes are doing. If we're unable to go on strike to protect our pay, how can we make sure that when there's a crisis where doctors are leaving because they're finishing medical school after 5 years of intense training with £100,000 of debt, how are we meant to alert people to that issue? It's really important that we maintain the healthcare of this country.
Let's put to one side the argument about whether we should have socialised healthcare at all. But if you're a patient who has had their operation delayed and delayed and delayed, and then you see that doctors might go on strike, and this would be a 6-month strike. We already know that the last time you went on strike, 1.5 million appointments and operations were cancelled or delayed further. What do you say to those patients? Because Wes Streeting says it's going to have a really detrimental effect. We know that for a fact because we've got the evidence. So how do we all kind of work together to make sure that that doesn't happen this time if you vote for strike action?
So, I mean, the only thing I can really say to patients is that I'm really, really sorry that the government has gone back on their promise of restoring our pay over time. Last year, we agreed to a deal that it would be the first step to pay restoration. A journey to fair pay, is what Wes Streeting said. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to commit to the second step. If you go on a journey and then stop at the first lay-by, that's not a negotiation, that's a betrayal.
So you think this is a breach of what was agreed?
It is absolutely a breach. And what happens if we accept this line down? Then next year it's a sub-inflationary pay increase again, the erosion continues, and then we lose the best and the brightest. And eventually, patients are the ones that suffer because they lose the best doctors of the country who have options.
And there you see the implied threat. Give us the money or we'll leave. It's a lot like the current argument being floated around about millionaires and how millionaires are leaving the country. This is the same type of argument, and it's been latched onto by the left. Of course, one of the problems with that argument is that the millionaires create the wealth to pay for the doctors. So there's a little bit of a difference there, whereas doctors, although they do a much needed and very necessary role in our society, I mean, we all know we need doctors, right? That's fine. But, you know, to threaten the populace with pay rises or that we'll go to New Zealand and we'll go and get a high-paid job elsewhere, as the young lady was wanting to go travelling, she's been a resident doctor and she's going to go travelling in New Zealand looking for healthcare opportunities. Okay, I hope you have a nice time doing that. But moving abroad and doing all of that, especially for people who have all of their families here, is difficult for normal people. When we're talking about millionaires and people that have tens of millions of pounds, it's not difficult for them. They just kind of decide that they're going to move somewhere, buy a house, and then kind of move over and let people deal with the rest of it. Junior doctors do not have that luxury. It's very, very difficult to move countries as a normal person. You know, there's a lot of expense and everything else that goes with moving countries. And of course, people have family here. And if you're not a multi-millionaire who can just jet set around the world, it's very, very difficult to just up sticks and go to New Zealand, because New Zealand seems like the place to go for resident doctors, for whatever reason that is. And of course, listening to that debate there, you get another flavour of how this NHS religion is perpetuated. And that's what it is, it's a religion. They will not countenance, and you saw Ed Balls' face there when he was confronted with that young lady who knew a thing or two about economics, it's fair to say. He looked at her and he realised that she was the business, and he just started squirming, and then he looked at the other guys as if to say, oh, we've got a live one here. And he's right, he did have a live one there, and it's 100% correct what you said. We need to look at an alternative funding model. This is straightforward. We have lower outcomes in our own National Health Service than the whole of Europe. So think on that. And we pay more per head than anywhere else in Europe. And so this much vaunted and, NHS, which is put on a pedestal, yes, it's fabulous, it's cared for me, it's cared for everyone I know, and it does work at the point of service without doubt. But there are problems with the service. And this inability to want to merge the private and the public in order to make a healthcare system that works for everybody is part of the problem.
Now, one of the UK's leading doctors has quit the British Medical Association over planned strike action, claiming it could damage trust in the profession. Well, IVF pioneer Lord Robert Winston joins me now. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us today. So talk us through this decision, Lord Winston. Why have you decided to resign from the BMA?
Well, I've got very serious concerns about the way the British Medical Association is behaving and the way it's run. And I think there are a lot of issues which need to be raised, but this is a very good moment because they have encouraged effectively young doctors to strike. And in fact, this is only a minority of doctors, but of course, very few people have actually voted in this whole decision anyway. So it's hardly a democratic decision. But in any case, it's thoroughly damaging. It's damaging to the doctors, it's damaging to the profession. Most importantly, it's damaging to patients, and the risk of taking one's work out means inevitably that somebody, at least somebody, will die, even if it's only a matter of 1 or 2 days after the strike has started. And people are waiting on longer lists, which are going to be completely further messed around. And it is, I think, quite a shocking decision to make.
Well, the BMA say they want a 29% pay rise. That they say that's to restore pay for resident doctors, who used to be known as junior doctors, of course, after years of wage erosion. They talk about it equating to resident doctors working for free a fifth of the time. Do you think that should, though, be addressed? And if it isn't there a risk that doctors might leave the profession or leave the country?
Well, first of all, I rather challenge the issue about the inflationary figures that they're quoting, because I think they are risky at best. But in any case, even if they're true, there are all sorts of ways that the doctors should be and can negotiate. There are various options that might be offered, but of course, the right decision is to ensure that Wes Streeting is brought into those discussions and that he has a chance. The government have done their very best to meet the doctors, and what I have to say is that it's very clear that most of us entered medicine because of the altruism involved. And of course, threats of strike have been ever since I came in 60 years ago as a member of the BMA. But actually, like most doctors, I've never been on strike and would not countenance it because I do not think it's in the best interests of anybody. There are different ways of dealing with the disputes, and this isn't one of them.
And so talk us through a little bit more how you would like to see the BMA tackling this. They obviously are concerned about doctors' pay, but also there are concerns amongst doctors about the conditions they're facing. Do you agree that they have a point there, and how could that be tackled?
Of course I agree that. And the conditions have gradually got worse over many years. For example, people on call don't often have a bed to sleep in, even when in fact they're exhausted after a night's work. They might even have to share a bed with somebody else who's also on call. There are all sorts of complete irregularities. The failure to have a decent meal at the end of a shift because it's not within the hours of when the stuff is being prepared. I've seen this, I've been involved in that myself. I've often come back from a shift in the past where, in fact, there wasn't a proper meal. And in fact, I didn't actually have a decent room to sleep in, which was private. And so, although, of course, I'm now retired, I can still see that fatigue and that unfortunate consequence on behaviour. I think, to some extent, this has been really manipulated because, let's face it, less than 1/5 of the doctors have actually voted for this strike.
So what do you think the impact of the strikes will be? Sum up what you think it means for the health service and for patients.
Well, you know as well as I do, there are people on waiting lists who won't get their operations done, as like last time. There are people who actually will be suffering, unable to find a doctor, and may actually end up, perhaps for a long time, in casualty, dying while they're waiting for somebody on a trolley. This is already happening. The NHS is absolutely at stretch point at the moment. And therefore, it's really important that we either support healthcare, or if we don't, then maybe we should resign and do something else. But actually, there are no shortage of people who want to be doctors. There are no shortage of good people who would like to be doctors. So I think we have to really ask ourselves, what are we doing medicine for? If I was a medical student now, I would still want to do medicine. Of course, what we have to do is to try work how we can improve the system. That used to happen much more. There needs to be much better negotiation.
And what do you make of the Health Secretary and the job that he's doing at the moment? He will quote monthly figures published this week showing that the NHS waiting list has fallen to 7.36 million. That's the lowest level for more than 2 years, but it's still very high, isn't it? How satisfied are you with the performance of the government so far on the NHS?
Well, I'm sure he's not satisfied either, but he's doing his best. Actually, how you calculate the waiting lists, of course, depends anyway. I don't want to comment on waiting list figures because actually that's really not an issue here, although I think it is important that people will obviously be longer on a list. I think West Streeting is doing his best in a health service which for a long time has been left underfunded. I think the real question, which we're not actually facing internationally, is how we get all political parties to look again at the NHS and review actually the funding model, because that is actually something that now is time. When the NHS started, it's worth consideration that the capitation fee per patient was only 10 and sixpence, less than £1, half of £1. Now the average capitation in England is about £3,000 per patient. That's what we spend. The NHS is not free at the point of entry. Of course, it's all part of our taxation. So how we spend our gross national product becomes important, and how we spend it in the right way. But we don't even know what each treatment actually costs, because the model of funding is not adequate any longer, and that needs to be looked at very carefully.
The first thing is that the doctors were given or have been given 22% over the previous 2 years, 5.4% this year. The government are promising above average inflation pay rises in the next few years while they're in power. So no, these junior doctors should not be coming out on strike and causing the deaths of people. They care more about their own wages and their own wants and needs above that of their patients. And that is the main qualifier for being a doctor, I would say. So no, they should not be allowed to go out on strike. They should be banned from doing so. And if you don't like it, then you can go to another country. And yes, our healthcare will suffer, but what do you want to do? You can't be held at gunpoint forever. At some point you have to look the blackmailer in the eye and say, do it. Let's get on with it and let's get this done, shall we? Outside of that, the only other thing that I would say is the funding model, which was brought up on that second clip I showed you. We need to have a sensible, grown-up conversation about funding. And of course, whenever a politician does that, like Nigel Farage, who has brought this up on a number of occasions, we get told that he wants to destroy our precious NHS, and that's not the case. So anytime any politician brings up an alternative model for funding this service, which is creaking and just generally floundering under the weight of bodies in this country, then we're not going to have a sensible debate about anything, because every time it gets brought up, the person gets hounded. And so for that reason, and because our political class is essentially like children in a playground, we're unable to have sensible debates about big issues like this. We used to have sensible debates, but we don't anymore. And we need somehow to come to terms with the fact that the current funding model isn't going to work long term. And the quicker we do that, and the quicker we merge private and public healthcare, the better it'll be for all. But we're just waiting for the politicians to catch up to the year 2025. It's a lot like other areas of life too, I suppose. So there you go, junior doctors. No, you shouldn't be going out on strike. You should be looking after people. You've had enough money recently and you're going to be getting more in future, so stop it. Anyway, thanks very much for your time.